And hello, everybody. This is Dennis Prager. Welcome to the Dennis Prager Show, where we talk about everything in life. This will be no exception right now. I think if you asked me the question, just out of nowhere, you just walked up to me and said, Dennis, tell me something that people mention a fantastic amount and know nothing about. And I would think, well, people talk about the weather a lot, but do they know? Yeah, people know something about the weather. So let's narrow it. Something that happened in history that is mentioned all the time, and especially since 9/11, and people know virtually nothing about, and what they do know is probably wrong. And then I think I would say, ta-da, the Crusades. So I have a professor who has written a great deal about the Crusades, is widely regarded as a historian of major import about the Crusades, and who I need to tell you is regarded by just about everybody as fair-minded, which is a remarkable achievement on such an emotional subject. He is Professor Thomas Madden, M-A-D-D-E-N. He's professor and chair. I love that chair. You don't have to comment on that, but I always think of a chair when I think of a chair, of the Department of History at St. Louis University, author of The New Concise History of the Crusades, published by a distinguished press. So there's no way of knowing what side he is on, and he's probably not on any side except the side of understanding it. I might add as well, though he does not know this, that his book meets one major criterion of mine, and that is that it is brief. And that means he's had to think a great deal in order to know what to put into his book. So, Professor Madden, with that introduction, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Thank you, Dennis. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much. You know, I have an approach to talk radio which has worked for 20-something years that I've been doing it. And that is, I never underestimate the intelligence of my audience, and I never overestimate their knowledge. And that's true for everybody. It's the people are very bright, but I don't expect them to know a lot about any given subject. So let's begin at the beginning with the Crusades, all right? Imagine you are, teaching a freshman seminar on this, and then we'll go on to the controversial aspects of it. First, if you wrote a concise history, how about a 1-minute concise history of the Crusades right now?
All right, the whole thing. The Crusades begin in the late 11th century in Europe. They are a response to some recent Muslim conquests of Christian territories in Asia Minor, the area that's today Turkey. And they begin with the First Crusade, logically enough, and it begins in 1096 and ends in 1099 with the conquest of Jerusalem. The First Crusade is about the only successful crusade that Europe will launch. However, continued struggles between Europe and usually the Muslim powers in the Middle East will continue over the course of the next 5 centuries, roughly. And so there will be many, many, many crusades called either to establish control over the holy sites in Jerusalem and the areas around that, or to defend against various Muslim empires attacking Christian territories.
All right, then that was perfect. It was. Now let's go backwards. When had those areas been under Christian control, and when were they wrested away by Muslims?
Okay. It depends on which area we're talking about. The area that, first of all of the territories around the Mediterranean had previously been under Christian control. So if we're talking about areas like what's today Israel or Jordan or Syria or Turkey or Egypt, all of those were parts of the Roman Empire, which was, after the 5th century, was a Christian empire. And so those were all controlled by Christian powers. And in fact, we're among the most Christian areas of the world. It's hard for people to think of that today, that, say, a place like Egypt or Syria would have been a very, very Christian area, but it's true. They fell to Muslim armies shortly after the death of Muhammad in the 7th century, when Arab armies came out of Arabia and conquered initially Egypt and the areas around Jerusalem and Syria. And so those areas then came under Muslim control at that point. And essentially, over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 centuries, there would be a basic continuance of this of Muslim armies continuing to press into Christian territories, eventually conquering all of North Africa and Spain before the 8th century. And then by the time we get to the 11th century, when the Crusades begin, then you have a new Muslim people, the Turks, who come in and conquer Asia Minor, and that's.
So let's take Jerusalem, for example, because that's what people know about a great deal.
Right.
When did that fall under Muslim control?
In 644.
In 644.
Right.
And the Crusades are 1096, so we're
Right.
talking 450 years under Muslim control.
Right, roughly that, yeah.
Before I ask question on the Christian attempt to regain their territory that was once under their control, how is it that this vast area of Christians became Muslim? I understand how how it fell under Muslim control, obviously, but a vast number of people must have converted.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
No, not completely. There were large numbers of converts during the first century or two. This was, and largely for the same reasons that people in those areas many centuries before may have converted to Christianity. It had become, Islam was the religion of power and authority, of high culture. It was also the only way to get to a high position in government was to be a Muslim. And so people over time began converting.
So that's really the point I was driving at. It was a question in this case with a thesis. So really the Christianity of a lot of the Christians in that area was relatively new and not terribly strong.
No, I think it was very strong. The point is that it took quite a while. That area became Christian over the course of about 4 centuries. And so it was very strong when the Muslims arrived. In fact, one of the reasons that the Muslim armies found it to be good pickings was because the Christians themselves were divided within themselves about the nature of Christ. And since virtually everyone was Christian, some of these debates were extremely harsh and difficult as to what precisely the nature of Christ was. So people cared a lot about it, and they thought a lot about it. And as I said, the conversion to Islam, for the most, about 2 centuries after the conquest, you could talk about maybe 50 or 60% of the population in that area being Muslim, but there was still a fairly large Christian minority.
Right, but I don't have a thesis that I want to advance beyond that, but it is still something I have found in my own reading remarkable that high percentage of Christians did convert and over 200 years, and you yourself say, well, it was the only way to get ahead. It was the dominant and high culture of that time, which I fully understand. But would you say that the majority who converted did so out of coercion or out of a desire, either theological or practical, to get ahead?
Well, it's impossible to say, but I would say probably most of them, just that it is part of, because
right.
it seemed like the thing to do, not necessarily cynically, but because it was the religion that was all around them. And it was a religion which offered them many of the same things that Christianity did. It's important to remember that according to Islamic law, those who are conquered who are not Muslim, as long as they're Christian or Jewish, they're allowed to retain their own religion. They hold a second-class citizen status, but they're allowed to keep their own religion.
No, they're known as dhimmi.
Dhimmi, that's right.
Yeah. We'll be back in a moment. We're learning here, and you can't learn it from somebody better, in my opinion. Thomas Madden, professor of history, St. Louis University. The New Concise History of the Crusades is his book, an excellent short read, and we will return in a moment and take calls at 1-8-PRAGER-776. You're listening to The Dennis Prager Show.